I live with it. This turn of events was relayed to me by an old on-off friend of mine. One of these people you haven't seen or heard from in anywhere between weeks and years, but with whom you share enough history and meaningful experiences so as to never truly lose touch. I mean, the guy was at my wedding, for goodness sake. He'd been practically family for a few years back before life happened. But I digress. In any case, his family is still unsure how to proceed, so in order to protect the privacy of all parties involved, let's just call him Vince. The two of us loved watching professional wrestling shows together, from our primary school days all the way through young adulthood. The story was told to me by what I could only describe as something that had once been Vince. The person I met behind the old burger joint, he'd insisted, outside, no people, was a battered, crumbling shell of the charismatic and mischievous at times friend I'd remembered. He looked emaciated, exhausted, bags under his eyes, wrinkles decorating his grayish face. Damn, he looked like a 50-year-old dealing with chronic health issues due to decades of chain smoking. At first, I hadn't recognized him, not until he called my name and attempted a courteous smile. Had his peculiarly overgrown, greasy, disheveled hair not been there for everyone to see, I would have thought of heartbreaking words like chemotherapy and radiation. At this point, please allow me to say that if any of you have ever had to witness a loved one going through that, my heart goes out to you. But specifically in a place like yours, I hope you do, because that's been the biggest thing for me. Vince, it's good to see you, buddy, I said in the most cheerful voice I could muster and put my arms around his shoulders. He didn't hug me back. He just sort of leaned forward so as not to leave me hanging. I could literally feel his bones poking at my chest and arms. Good, he answered, probably not realizing I hadn't yet gotten around to posing the generic "how've you been." He sat down, which was a little weird as it was raining earlier and the sidewalk was wet and muddy. "I'm gonna tell you something now and I need you to listen to me," he said, avoiding eye contact. "Sure, mate, lay it on me," I said, smiling, still trying to make our encounter slightly more normal and not as awkward, for me at least. This is the story he told me, from his perspective. Hot job I got back then. A little after we'd lost touch, the position stated Junior Acquisition Manager. It was basically just sales, of higher status, the bigger fish, the bigger numbers. They'd send me to handle delicate matters like people refusing to sell due to non-financial reasons. The deal with these people? The tiny store has been in their family since their great-great-grandfather built it with his own two hands, or their spouse is buried in the yard, and in many years their children will be too, etc. I'd go there and work my magic. Find an angle to work, a pressure point to exploit, anything to make them sign the bloody contract and get my juicy commission. When I'd first started working in sales, I'd feel bad, shoving these useless products into people's faces, their minds. I didn't think I'd make it more than 1 month, and then, as it turned out, I was a natural. Customers would actually tell me that they were uncertain about whatever crap I'd been selling at the time, but I sounded like an honest person, so they felt at ease trying it. But I knew better, I knew I was selling them useless, unnecessary shit. It's not the quality that, it's not that we scammed people. Everybody got what they paid for. It was just stupid. Like, the last gig I'd worked before reaching management for major insurance agency, name redacted in order to avoid potential liability. A newlywed couple who'd just signed their lives away to mortgage didn't need our premium selective house insurance policy. The generic one they'd already had would cover enough scenarios and offer more than adequate compensation. I still convinced them to buy it. The old man whose wife had been bedridden and depended upon the care of her home nurse didn't need the complimentary benefits package, and God knows he couldn't afford it. That money would come from his already meager pension. He'd probably have to skim and borrow just to be able to afford food and medications. I knew that because we'd purchased all these details, all this allegedly private information, from companies with privacy policy agreements people should have paid more attention to. Doesn't matter, though. I still did it. In fact, after a couple months, I'd found out that I could easily change my intonation and speech flow in order to turn on what my superior called persuasion mode. Go whisper in their ears and get us that money, she'd tell me and wink. And I would. I'm not going to lie, I enjoyed it. The challenge, the hunt, the conquest. I couldn't get a girl or win a brawl if my life depended on it, as you know. But this I could do better than most. People perhaps better than anyone. It made me proud, confident, even euphoric. It was the best high in my life, man. Forget about that first huff of weed on grade 11. I was flying. And for the first time, I was also the pilot. One afternoon, I convinced a family of illegal immigrants to sell me their property. A cop, some friend with benefits of my superior, gave her the tip about a family about to be processed by immigration services, probably deported. Something about a huge fake visa scheme that blew up when that crime boss had been arrested way back. So, the way I saw it, why not have some money in your pockets while you're at it? Am I right? If they're going to be deported anyway, why not liquidate the funds? I mean, if I do nothing, the authorities seize the property due to it being purchased illegally in a manner involving fraudulent conduct or whatever. Nobody would care that that family had been scammed, that they had probably thought they were paying for actual visas. They'd still take their house, throw them in a cell, and then on a bus back to Third Worldville. So I was doing them a favor. Yeah, I know what you think. That kind of low-level self-deceiving crap ain't supposed to work on grown-ups. Especially not on me, the regional king of bullshit. But it did. I guess because I wanted it to. And if I was going to save them from poverty in their new lives, I might as well cut some of the corners, right? So what? Without me, they'd get nothing, wouldn't they? A little is better than nothing, isn't it? I told them about the fake visa bust, explained how I was giving them their only chance of being deported with money in their pockets to feed their kids, then finally threatened to call immigration myself that very moment. And father had tears rolling down his cheeks when he told his wife to bring him a pen. That contract was for 30% the price my superior had authorized me to offer. I told him the highest I could offer was a sum equal to 20% of that number, then faked a phone conversation to my boss in which I pleaded with them to offer a little bit more. Because it's a family with children, I was lying my ass off, man. And it came as naturally as sneezing when you have to je n'applaus inglesim. I wasn't even thinking. As I left, the mother looked at me with what I could only describe as grave disappointment, the way your mom would look at you if you were ever arrested for something like child porn. I smiled at her, not empathetically but triumphantly, and wished her a good day. I knew I was getting a fat bonus and probably a promotion soon enough. And to hell with the collateral damage. That's just life. When I told my superior, she was ecstatic. Vince, my boy, you've just set your future, and it's bright and full of cash, she said. I was quite excited myself. Since it made no sense to start working another case at that time, I simply called it an early day and thought I'd treat myself to a nice meal in the area. The fair was in the neighborhood, so there were many food stands offering all sorts of foreign delicacies, and I stopped near a Middle Eastern stand. Do you know what shawarma is? Pay some old crone a few coins and have her tell me how successful and amazing I'm gonna be. It's not like I'd been in the habit of being so wasteful with my money. It was sort of a momentary whim, a one-time thing. However, as I drew near the tent, I started feeling quite embarrassed. It was ridiculous. Why would I throw away money like that? I could give these coins to a hungry beggar for some food or booze or whatever rocks their boat on a cold, lonely night in the streets. I could put it in my old piggy bank for a rainy day. Heck, I could toss the coins to a bloody wishing well and and would make more sense than seeing a self-proclaimed fortune teller. So I went back to my seat next to the food stand and ordered a dessert because why not? A few moments after I'd left the food stand, I suddenly heard a hoarse, loud voice saying, or rather shouting, "Well, it's about time." I instinctively turned my head towards the sound and saw a short, skinny old woman dressed like she'd just left a Hunchback of Notre Dame costume rehearsal for her part as a gypsy. The big round ring earrings, the purple untidy pieces of fabric covering her, the bandana on her head, even her walking stick appeared to be some tacky replica used in a play. And it sort of stood out because the fair wasn't designed with any other gypsy motives. Everything else was fairly standard: clowns, Ferris field, cotton candy. However, even with all that, her most distinctive feature was without a doubt her eyes. They were simply black, meaning the irises were somehow blacker than the pupil. Don't ask me how. It was because of her eyes and how they'd simply commanded all of my attention in a single moment that I noticed her gaze was, for some unknown reason, fixed on me. I wanted to say something or maybe do something, but every time a thought of optional words or actions came to my mind, I lost it because I kept noticing, again and again, how unnaturally black her eyes looked. "Well?" she asked in a scolding voice. "Are you going to keep me waiting for long? Tell me, are you always in the habit of being late to your appointments, or is this especially for me?" I finally managed to stutter an "I beg your pardon, ma'am," to which she chuckled. "Oh, begging already? And we haven't even started yet. Well, come along then." And she gestured me towards the open flap of the tent, which, I should add, appeared completely inconspicuous compared to the other tents, stands, and booths, but for the fortune teller sign. I'm not sure why, but I followed her inside. It was nothing like what you'd imagine. No incense, no crystal ball, no astrological maps, no rolled up scrolls, not even flowers in a vase. Simply a small plastic table with two little stools. She sat on one and pointed at the other. "I'm sorry, ma'am," I said while sitting down. "I believe there might have been a mistake." "Well, I'd say," she shouted again, "your appointment was for almost 12 minutes ago. I must be getting soft in my old age or I wouldn't even bother with you." At this point, I started getting annoyed with the entire predicament. "Listen, lady," I said, standing up. "I've made no appointment with you. I've never even seen you in my life. I have no idea who you are. But if that's how you speak to your customers, I can see why you can't afford better interior decorations." I was about to walk out the tent when her voice sounded again, even louder. Oh, no. "Oh? Sit down, Vincent." She used my friend's full name. "Do not presume me to be one of your hapless victims. Your poisonous deception has no potency in my ears." I turned around and looked at her. I'm no deceiver, that's all I could come up with. I wanted to ask how she knew my name, why she thought she could berate me like that, but that's all I could manage, a defensive mumble. Cheeky pointing at me. Cheeky pointing at me? My hands still shook a little. "Oh, aren't you now?" she asked, her voice reeking of contempt. She knew. I don't know how she knew. I don't know how I knew that she knew. But looking at her eyes, I felt more ashamed than ever before. In fact, the shame I felt was greater than anything I've ever felt before or will ever feel again. I fell to my knees, trembling as I sobbed uncontrollably. "There it is," she smirked, obviously pleased with herself. Um, oh, let me tell you some stories, some juicy gossip, like you city folk are so happy to spread. Let's make it something relevant, something about you and some of the people you've met these past few months. How do you call it at the office? Follow up." I wanted to answer her, mainly to ask her to stop, but I hadn't yet found my bearing. Let's see now. Where to begin? She told me about each and every case I handled, each and every person I manipulated, conned, and practically swindled for my own financial profit. A girl who became a prostitute because her mother had no money left after her father passed. because all their savings had gone into the premium medical insurance policies, the ones I promised would save his life. I'm a bedridden elderly woman who somehow managed to place an emergency call when her husband didn't answer her from the living room, and the EMTs found him dead on the floor after he had fainted due to starvation combined with taking his pills on an empty stomach. Some say that. And finally, the two parents who would soon be called to testify against the crooks who sold them fake visas for their family. When they would ask when the government was planning to deport them, the surprised agents would guarantee that that wouldn't happen, and wondered why the heck would the victims of a crime think they were going to be punished for it. The two older kids of these parents would be forced to drop out of school and find work in order to help cover the new expenses of rent and deposits, ending up in whatever awful future that awaits minority children without an education. I couldn't talk, I couldn't breathe, I could no longer cry. My entire mental, cognitive, and emotional capacity was dedicated to self-loathing. I wanted to kill that bastard who did all those terrible things, and I didn't even care that it was me. I then realized I could hear myself thinking again, meaning that the fortune teller had finally stopped. I turned to look at her, and she was still staring at me. So now leave this place, she hissed. Leave, and live every day with the weight of the suffering you've caused innocent souls. She then shrugged. Or don't. It's good. Her buddy, tried to get some messages out to her, and she was like, I'm good. That moment, I heard laughter and footsteps approaching. I looked towards the open flap of the tent and saw two men dressed in basic undergarments, wearing clown makeup on their faces. Oh, excuse me, sir, this here tent is off limits. It's for us carnies, one of them said and winked. I was waiting for my tormentor to scold them, but when I looked at her direction, I saw nothing. Nothing but an empty stool. Mate, the half-clown spoke again. I know you heard me. Now please. We still got a couple more hours of joyous hoo-ha, do you mind? I mumbled an apology, got out of there, and started walking home. I'd initially meant to get a cab, as it was like 15 Kim to my apartment, but for some reason, it simply slipped my mind. Maybe because every single person I saw, whether in the streets or on the road, had those same damned black eyes, seeing me, judging me, hating me. Vince blinked away some tears, made up some juvenile excuse, and sprinted away from there. And I do mean sprinted. Running like a vicious wolf was chasing him. I was left there, filled with too many emotions to react. I kept quiet throughout his story, at first because I wanted to respect his wish and hear him out, but later because I found myself unable to decide what to say, not knowing if there was even anything to say to make things right for him again. That encounter with Vince behind the burger joint had taken place approximately 2 weeks ago. 3 days later, Vince was found dead by his worried parents, who had the fire department bash his door down. The coroner said he'd been dead for at least a couple of days. There's a fair chance he died right after I saw him that evening. At first, I blamed myself for not realizing how grave and dire his condition was. In a way, I still do. Then again, perhaps he made a choice, like the old woman told him. I'll miss my friend, but if nothing else, I'm glad he at least had a chance to unburden himself before he died.